your next MacBook is already going to cost you more. For decades, Apple has carefully crafted one of the most resilient supply chains in the tech world. But right now, even they can't handle the heat. The cost of memory and storage chips has skyrocketed across the board, and we are already seeing that reflected in the prices of MacBooks and iPads. Now, reports suggest Apple is going straight to Washington, asking for political green lights to buy DRAM from Changxin Memory Technologies, or CXMT, China's biggest memory chip maker. Let's be clear, this reported request doesn't mean ink is on paper. It doesn't mean Chinese RAM is sitting inside the MacBook you buy today, and it certainly doesn't mean CXMT just kicked Samsung, SK, Hynix, or Micron to the curb. But the mere fact that Apple is exploring this route shows just how bad the memory drought has gotten. DRAM prices reportedly shot up by an incredible 98% during the first 3 months of 2026, with another big jump predicted for the second quarter. The explosion of AI is eating up advanced memory, factory space, packaging materials, and money at a speed the consumer tech world completely missed. So, why did Apple bump up their prices? Usually, Apple steers clear of sudden price hikes in the middle of a product's life cycle. They like keeping prices steady because shoppers compare different models, stores need to plan their stock, and the whole product family is built around very specific price tags. That game plan went out the window when the cost of memory and storage went up way too fast. The base model MacBook Neo jumped from $599 to $699. A 512GB MacBook Air shot up from $1,099 to $1,999. The 128GB iPad Air climbed from $599 to $749. Even other gadgets like Macs, HomePods, and Apple TVs got hit with price hikes. Apple explained that these increases couldn't be helped, simply because they could no longer shield buyers from how fast and how high component costs were rising. Think about it. If a giant like Apple can't fight off memory inflation, smaller PC and phone brands are probably sweating even more right now. So, how exactly did AI trigger this memory crisis? An AI chip is really only as good as the memory that supplies it. Massive AI models need huge amounts of data to sit right next to the processor. Training these models requires high bandwidth memory to keep thousands of computing cores busy. Running the models uses up memory too, because the system has to constantly read the model's weights every time it spits out a new word or token. Because of this, high bandwidth memory, or HBM, has become one of the most prized commodities in the chip world. Heavy hitters like Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron are pouring money into high bandwidth memory because the profits are way better than what they make on standard chips. Building this memory takes up DRAM manufacturing lines, high-tech packaging, smart engineers, cash, and factory time. That is time and resources that would normally go toward making standard memory for servers, laptops, and phones. When factory space is tight, these companies naturally cater to the buyers and products that bring in the most cash. AI firms have no problem paying premium prices, since a single AI setup can cost tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. On the flip side, a company making laptops can't just keep raising component budgets without eventually scaring away buyers. The result? Prices go up. Apple's new price tags are the ultimate proof that the AI memory squeeze isn't just a data center problem anymore. This brings us to why CXMT suddenly matters. Launched back in 2016, breaking into the DRAM market is incredibly difficult. Success hinges entirely on massive scale, high yields, strict process control, top-tier reliability, and cutting costs aggressively. Even a tiny manufacturing error can ruin the number of functioning chips you get from a single wafer. Initially, CXMT focused on providing basic DRAM components for the Chinese market. While their early tech was behind global industry giants, they kept scaling up their factories, sharpening their production methods, and rolling out newer generations of DDR and low-power chips. Today, they are widely seen as the fourth biggest DRAM supplier globally, even if they're still a dwarf compared to the big three. But Apple doesn't need CXMT to outsize Samsung. They just need a solid alternative supplier that can deliver approved memory in high volumes. Having even a minor backup source boosts Apple's leverage at the bargaining table and dilutes its reliance on a tiny group of suppliers. This current crisis has turned CXMT from a minor player into a very appealing lifeline. So, what exactly is Apple asking for? Word is, Apple has been quietly pressing the US government for the green light to source chips from CXMT. The tech giant had to loop in officials because CXMT is currently on a Pentagon list of firms with suspected ties to the Chinese military. Being on that list doesn't immediately hand down a total legal ban on buying their products, but it introduces massive political, public relations, and legal risks. A vendor allowed today could easily face harsher sanctions tomorrow. Apple could pour months into vetting a component, restructuring its shipping lanes, and signing deals, only for new policies to completely kill the partnership. That's why getting political approval up front is so crucial, even if the deal isn't strictly illegal right now. Apple needs absolute certainty that it won't anchor its supply chain to a company that Washington might outlaw down the line. So far, the White House hasn't publicly signed off on the request, and neither Apple nor CXMT has announced an official partnership. Right now, this is just Apple trying to open a door, not a guarantee that they'll walk through it. Then there's Apple's brutal validation process. Becoming an Apple supplier takes a lot more than just pitching a cheap price tag. Their memory chips have to hit strict benchmarks for speed, power usage, heat management, durability, and long-term uniformity. A chip might excel in a single lab trial but completely fall apart when scaled for mass production. Apple demands parts that work perfectly across millions of gadgets. A vendor has to deliver identical quality from one factory run to the next. They have to supply massive volumes exactly on time, backing Apple through huge product rollouts, shifting global demands, and sudden factory shutdowns. When it comes to MacBooks and iPads, energy efficiency is paramount. If the memory hogs power, battery life drops and the device gets too hot, reliability is just as vital, since flawed memory triggers crashes, lost files, or bricked devices. CXMT will have to prove their chips measure up to Apple's strict engineering standards and that their production lines can maintain that precision at scale. Apple will also likely demand deep factory audits, clear component tracking, tight security, and backup plans. Getting a political pass only unlocks the door. Surviving the technical tests is what determines if CXMT actually gets inside. Because of this, Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron need to keep their eyes open. The traditional chip giants still hold the crown in global DRAM. They own massive fabrication plants, deliver the most cutting-edge tech, boast deep client relationships, and have decades of manufacturing know-how under their belts. CXMT isn't going to dethrone them by tomorrow morning, but just the fact that Apple is interested carries massive symbolic power. Apple is famously one of the toughest, most high-profile tech buyers on the planet. If CXMT manages to secure even a tiny slice of Apple's memory orders, the rest of the tech industry will sit up and take notice. A successful deal with Apple instantly validates CXMT's quality control and manufacturing capacity. Plus, it gives Apple a massive chip during negotiations with its current suppliers. Look, memory is a highly cyclical commodity market. Tiny shifts in supply and demand trigger huge swings in pricing. Bringing a viable new player into the mix doesn't mean you have to wipe out Samsung or Micron to disrupt the status quo. It just has to break the monopoly and show that buyers actually have choices. The mere threat of CXMT joining Apple's supply web could start driving chip prices down long before a single order actually ships. For China, landing a deal with Apple would be a massive milestone, far beyond just a boost in sales. It would prove to the world that a domestic memory builder can hit the grueling standards of the planet's premier tech tastemaker. That stamp of approval could ignite massive confidence across Chinese PC, smartphone, server, and car companies. It would fuel CXMT's growth helping them refine their craft through sheer volume. In the chip game, you get better by doing. Higher manufacturing volume means more data, and more data helps engineers spot defects, boost yields, and slash production costs. Partnering with a tech titan can completely supercharge a supplier's evolution. However, it also creates a double-edged sword of dependence. CXMT would have to bend to Apple's every whim, handle aggressive pricing demands, and pour fortunes into future tech pipelines. Apple is notorious for squeezing suppliers on cost while demanding absolute perfection. Winning the contract is a trophy. Keeping it profitable is a whole different beast. So, could this actually make MacBooks cheaper for you? Maybe, but don't hold your breath just yet. While adding an extra supplier spices up competition and spreads out procurement risk, it won't trigger an overnight price drop. If CXMT provides validated memory at a lower rate, it certainly eases the financial strain on Apple. But remember, Apple has already hiked its retail prices, and tech companies almost never walk back broad price increases unless the market completely flips. The overall memory ecosystem is still incredibly constrained. A single factory line cannot instantly fill the global supply gap. CXMT still has to take care of its domestic clients while scaling up factories and advancing its tech. Any potential deal with Apple would likely kick off with small volumes or specific niche items rather than the flagship MacBook lineup. And let's be real, there's no guarantee Apple would pass those component savings down to you. They could easily pocket the extra cash to protect their profit margins, lock down supply lines, or simply prevent prices from rising even higher. The most likely short-term win here is just stopping the bleeding. CXMT gives Apple a crucial buffer while the rest of the global supply network struggles to keep up with the insatiable demands of AI. Then there's the political headache. This is where a simple tech story turns into a geopolitical mess. A lot of US lawmakers are bound to push back against any deal with CXMT, pointing to national security risks and the ongoing push to decouple from Chinese tech. They'll argue that giving Apple's massive business to CXMT directly props up a strategic Chinese chipmaker. On the flip side, others are focused on consumer prices and keeping supply chains afloat. Cutting off a viable supplier during a massive shortage just jacks up costs for American businesses and shoppers. Apple is caught right in the middle. They sell a massive amount of gear in China, build most of their hardware through Asian networks, and rely on global partners. Yet, they are a flagship American company facing massive political pressure. A chip deal that makes total economic sense on paper could easily become a political non-starter. And that unpredictable landscape might be the biggest hurdle of all. Now, let's separate the hype from the hard facts. The headlines sound dramatic, but we need to keep things in perspective. Apple is reportedly seeking permission to buy from CXMT. No contract has been signed yet. There is no Chinese RAM hidden inside the MacBooks on store shelves right now. That massive 98% price spike reflects general market pricing during a specific window, not the exact premium Apple pays for every single chip. And while MacBook and iPad prices went up across several tiers, iPhone pricing stayed put when this dropped. Don't forget, CXMT is still a step behind the top dogs in cutting-edge tech and raw output capacity. The real takeaway isn't that Apple is turning its back on Samsung, Hynix, and Micron. It's that the memory drought is so intense, Apple is willing to gamble on a politically risky supplier they used to ignore. Here's my take. This move by Apple is the ultimate proof that the AI boom has fundamentally revalued memory. For the longest time, DRAM was treated like a basic commodity you bought from a handful of trusted names. Now, memory is a strategic asset. AI giants are vacuuming up the global supply. Prices are spiking fast enough to alter retail pricing, and a Chinese firm that used to be an afterthought suddenly holds serious leverage just because they have open factory capacity. Maybe this deal never crosses the finish line. Political pushback could kill it. CXMT might flunk Apple's tests, or the shortage might break before the first shipment lands. But the fact that they asked changes everything. It proves that securing your supply chain matters more than old ideas about who is an acceptable partner. It also shows how the hidden costs of AI infrastructure are trickling down to everyday people. When you buy a laptop today, you are literally paying the price for the arms race happening inside massive data centers. So, what's your take? Should Apple be allowed to source memory from CXMT if the chips hit their tech standards? Or does the long-term strategic danger outweigh any quick cost savings? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe for more straight-shooting coverage of the chips, factories, and engineering choices shaping the future of technology. Because Apple isn't looking at Chinese memory just for fun. They're looking at it because a 98% price explosion has made their old supply chain simply too expensive to ignore.